Yeah, I know I guess he was the first Egyptian president to go Christian or Catholic Christian.
What would you like to see? What would be your number one thing to see Ted?
Absolutely. I'd love to chat longer with you. All right, see you later. All right, thanks.
Good grades? Yeah. Consider it. I'm gonna go to big grad.
Good afternoon. Well, I don't think I'll say anything else. I don't usually get applause after I speak. So it's good to get it over with before I start, I guess. It's been a great day. We got a chance to pick some of it up online, but thanks. We're getting a lot of coverage around the country. Good ideas, good discussion. But I can't think of anyone I'd rather introduce right now than Ted Cruz. There are very few people I know in any organization, especially in Congress, who have the intellectual capability to understand complex problems, to actually come up with good solutions, but then to have the courage, the personal fortitude to actually push those ideas through and to stand up to incredible pressure, the kind of pressure I was talking about this morning from all the big cronies in Washington that want to maintain the status quo. Ted Cruz has been willing to stand up and say no. I was talking to him on the way in. I said things seem to be going pretty well, and he said it's like the guy who's fallen off the building. Every floor he goes by, he says, "So far, so good." I know that feeling. The bottom is coming, right? But I think Ted Cruz is definitely on his way up. And that's what I hear around the country. Not so much thanks for what you've done or all the victories you've won, but more than anything else, I hear thanks for fighting. And that's what people want, is someone who just stand up for what they say they believe, stand up for the values of Americans, and just do what you can. And Ted Cruz has definitely done that as much as anyone I know, and I'm real proud to know him. Ted, come share your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, each of you, for having me here. Good afternoon on this cold, wintry day in Washington. These are extraordinary times. These are remarkable times. You know, just last week, walking down the hallway in the Capitol, I ran into a janitor carrying a screwdriver, coming to change the sign on Harry Reid's door. And I'll tell you, with all great change, there's usually foreshadowing. You know, you could get the foreshadowing of the November election come August, September, October. You know, one of the first signs, Jim, is suddenly the Democratic senators were nice to us. They were looking ahead to Election Day, and you'd be on the elevator, they'd say, hey, what a great tie that is. Have you lost weight? You're looking sharp. It's like, okay, so contemplating losing that chairman's gavel, are you? It was an astonishing election in November. But it's important to understand what the election signified. The election was not an embrace of Republicans. The election was not an embrace of one party. Instead, the election, in my view, was the voters roundly repudiating the path we're on. This was an election in which the voters said, listen, the Obama economy, it ain't working. We want something different. We want real leadership. Now, I got to say, Republicans have an opportunity, an incredible opportunity right now. We have been once again entrusted with leadership in Congress. And I want to say thank you to Heritage Action for hosting this event. Because as I understand this event, the core focus is you got a majority, what are you going to do with it? And you know, there's a division of thought in this town. There are some people in this town who will intone in gravelly voices, we need to get things done. Oddly enough, the people saying that, it doesn't really matter what those things are. There are voices who will say, if you stand for anything significant, that has electoral risk. I remember in the last 2 years, people said, no, Republicans, you shouldn't stand and fight on anything because you don't have a majority. Okay, we have a majority. Now, mark my words, suddenly there are voices that are saying, well, you still shouldn't stand and fight because you don't have 60. You know what? If we had won 60 seats in the Senate, you'd hear the voices saying, what? No, not yet. You don't have 67 votes. I'll tell you this. If you get elected promising to do nothing, when you're in office, you will do nothing. I'm going to suggest a different way to get things done, a different way to govern, and a different way to win elections. Listen, I very much agree with President Ronald Reagan, who said the Republican Party is not a fraternal order. It's not simply about palling around with guys in red sweaters instead of blue sweaters. It is a movement unified around a shared set of ideals. Liberty, the Constitution. And it matters only insofar as we are standing up and defending those constitutional values. And so what I would encourage my friends, my colleagues in the Republican Party, in the Senate and the House, is something very, very simple. Let's stand up and lead. Let's lead with a big, bold, positive agenda that says to the American people, you had a referendum and you rejected the Obama agenda. There is a better way. That's our opportunity. I'll tell you, for all the Republicans intoning, we must get things done. If we simply settle into business as usual in this town and keep growing and growing and growing the Leviathan and keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking that sphere of individual liberty, we will demoralize the millions of men and women who came out in November and gave Republicans the biggest majority in the House since the 1920s. Not only will we not win elections, we'll get walloped, and we'll deserve to get walloped. What I would urge my colleagues to do is very, very simple. You know, it's the advice. A lot of us here have kids. Every one of us has told our kids, tell the truth and do what you said you would do. That is the advice I would give every one of our colleagues. You know, it's striking in the Senate. 2 years ago, I remember joining the other Republican freshmen in Mitch McConnell's office. There were 3 of us. It was lonely. It was really lonely. We had enough for a game of spades. This year, there are 12 Republican freshmen. A dozen. Nearly a quarter of the Republican conference are freshmen. And I'll tell you what I've encouraged every freshman is that if each of you that just fought and clawed to win an election, if each of you in the conference simply stands up every day and says, hey, let's do what we said we would do, that will have a transformational effect on the United States Senate. If each and every senator in January answers questions the exact same way we would have answered those questions in October before the election, that'll have a transformative effect. In my view, Republicans should take this opportunity to lead with a big, bold agenda that focuses on jobs, on liberty, and on security. And let me talk about 10 specific agenda items that we should take up and pass, and these are agenda items that I laid out before the election. If we want a majority, this is what we should do, and after the election, my view, shock of all shocks, is we should do exactly what we said before the election. Step number 1, embrace a big, positive jobs, growth, and opportunity agenda. Now that means a host of things. It means, for example, as we will do this week, finally passing the Keystone Pipeline. But listen, jobs are a lot more than Keystone. Keystone matters. It is an example of partisan politics trumping common sense in this town. But we need a jobs agenda, an energy agenda, far broader than that. We've seen incredible growth in the energy sector in the last several years. Last year, I introduced the American Energy Renaissance Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation to remove the federal barriers to creating millions of high-paying jobs in the private sector, in the energy sector. And not just in energy. Low-cost energy is also bringing manufacturing jobs back, bringing steel jobs back, bringing the kind of jobs that built the dignity of the middle class in America. We need to pass legislation making clear that the federal government has no authority to regulate or prohibit fracking, that the states are perfectly poised to make determinations in their own states, and there's no need for the feds to stick their nose in the middle of it. We need to remove the arbitrary export bans on liquid natural gas, on crude oil. We need to open up federal lands to exploration, to development. President Obama loves to brag about the energy exploration during his tenure without noting that virtually all of it has happened on private land and federal land The federal government has been standing as an impediment, as a barrier to developing those resources. Number two, we need to do everything humanly possible to repeal Obamacare. You know, 5 years ago, when Obamacare was being debated, reasonable minds perhaps could have differed over whether this thing might work. Today, seeing the devastation, seeing the train wreck, seeing the millions of Americans who've lost their jobs, who've been forced into part-time work, who've lost their health care, who've lost their doctors, today, the only reasonable, prudent outcome is to acknowledge this thing isn't working. And we need to repeal it and start over. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean with President Obama still in the White House? Well, first of all, in my view, Congress should take up and using every procedural tool available, including reconciliation, repeal Obamacare with 51 votes in the Senate. Now, the president is very, very likely to veto that. For the next 2 years, we're not going to have the votes to override that veto. What we then need to do is systematically begin teeing up legislation after legislation addressing the most harmful consequences of Obamacare, providing real relief to the millions of people who are hurting. For example, we need to introduce legislation, take it up and vote on it, saying, if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep your health insurance plan. The president repeatedly looked in the TV cameras and made that promise over and over and over again. We need to codify it for the 6 million people who've had their health insurance plans canceled because of Obamacare. We need to address the pain the federal government has caused to them. And I would note that also puts Democrats in an interesting position. There are lots of Senate Democrats who say, well, gosh, I like Obamacare in the abstract, but there are individual problems with it. Okay, let's start talking about those individual problems. One after the other, you decide, as a Senate Democrat, if you're in favor of the federal government causing people to lose their health insurance plans or not. You decide if you're a Senate Democrat. If you're in favor of the federal government bailing out giant insurance companies or not. We need to pass straightforward legislation that prohibits federal government bailouts of the insurance companies. One after the other, we need to pass these. Now, one of two things is going to happen. One, the Democrats block it either through filibuster in the Senate or through the president vetoing it. Or two, they pass into law. If the latter, we begin to provide meaningful relief to the people who are really hurting. And if the former, there is absolute clarity as to where the parties stand and what we stand for. But we need to honor those commitments. Number three, we need to finally secure the border and stop the president's unconstitutional amnesty. You know, it's amazing. Right now, the White House is castigating Republicans. How dare you focus on securing the border? Literally at the very same time, we are seeing terrorists trying to murder free people across the globe. The very same day CENTCOM has been hacked by ISIS. The White House press secretary is too busy saying, no, don't do anything to secure the border and protect Americans. This is a matter of basic common sense. And I got to tell you, one of the fun things about Washington is listening to Senate Democrats who live in states far, far away from the border. Explain to those of us who live in states on the border how wonderfully secure the border really is. I have a modest suggestion. Perhaps we should move the White House down to the Rio Grande Valley. After all, there can't be more people climbing the White House fence than there are now. You know, when you go down to the valley, and in Texas we have a nearly 2,000-mile border on the southern border, what you hear from people who live there, what you hear from law enforcement, from local elected officials, and by the way, from Republicans and Democrats, is secure the borders and protect our security. It's a basic common sense issue, and when it comes to amnesty, anyone who's concerned about rule of law, anyone who is concerned about separation of powers, anyone who believes in the Constitution should be deeply, deeply dismayed by the President's decree that he will simply ignore federal law. When he unilaterally tried to grant amnesty to millions of voters, I said voters. What's interesting about the President's approach on this is it seems like it is always, always, always political. Before the election, President Obama said, "This election will be a referendum on my policies. Every one of my policies will be on the ballot." President Obama was right. Words that have not been said often at the Heritage Foundation. But you better believe, if the Senate Democrats had been reelected, if Harry Reid had grown his majority, the president would have gotten up and opined, "The people have spoken, and they have embraced my agenda." Instead, the president got up and said, "The people who didn't vote have spoken." Never mind those pesky people that actually showed up and expressed their views. Let me say something about both Obamacare and amnesty. If we brought Michael J. Fox up here in a DeLorean, and we went back in time to October of 2014, not too long ago, you would see Republican candidates all over the country in October of 2014 saying, "If you elect us, if you give us a Republican majority, what will we do? Number one, we're going to fight tooth and nail to repeal Obamacare." The number one topic Republican candidates raised on the campaign trail. And number two, if you elect us, if you give us a Republican majority, we're going to stop President Obama's illegal and unconstitutional amnesty. That was just over 2 months ago. And yet now, when the topics come up, at times you hear crickets chirping. It ain't complicated. We need to do what we said we would do. Number four, we need to hold government accountable and rein in judicial activism. You know, one of the most important things this new Senate is going to provide, I hope and believe, is real, meaningful oversight of the Obama administration, of the abuse of power, of the lawlessness, of the regulatory abuse. I am looking forward to what I hope will be Republican chairmen conducting careful, sober, serious inquiries into the abuse of power and the millions of people who are hurting because of it. I'm looking forward to seeing the United States Senate finally begin doing its job. For 6 years, Harry Reid has been Barack Obama's most important protector. I'm looking forward to seeing serious inquiries into the trampling of religious liberties that have occurred over the last 6 months. I'm looking forward to seeing finally some real scrutiny to prevent judicial activists from being put on the bench who will impose their own radical agenda, including, sadly, the judicial activism we have seen in recent months, with the courts effectively striking down the marriage laws in 33 states. Constitution makes clear marriage is a question for the states. It's not a question for a bunch of unelected federal judges who may disagree with the democratic views of the people who live in the United States of America. Number 5, it's time to stop the culture of corruption. I've said a lot of times that the biggest divide we have in this country politically, it's not between Republicans and Democrats. It's not between the establishment and the Tea Party, as our friends in the media like to write about. It is instead between career politicians in Washington in both parties and the American people. Now, I am hopeful we will see real bold leadership from Republicans this year and next. But I got to say, the lame duck was aptly named. It was not encouraging to see the Cromnibus, a giant pile of corporate welfare, being the first things Republicans rushed to pass through. Wouldn't it be nice to see our elected officials respond with the same diligence to the taxpayers that they respond to the promises made to lobbyists on K Street? This town is fundamentally corrupt. Both parties come together and they say, let's reauthorize the XM Bank. Why? Helps a whole bunch of giant corporations, just hurts the little guys. The big guys give us checks, the little guys don't. One of the many, many reasons we need to finally pass a term limits amendment to the United States Constitution. Serving in Congress should not be a lifetime job. But what should be lifetime is a ban on members of Congress becoming lobbyists and coming back after serving in this job. We need to pass fundamental tax reform, making our tax code simpler, flatter, fairer. And I'll tell you the single most important tax reform. We should abolish the IRS. Now, the voices of Washington will say, tisk, tisk. That is inconsistent with getting things done. You know, I will note, some years ago, Steve Forbes did a remarkable job starting to build the foundation for a flat tax. A simple flat tax that is fair, that every American could fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. The last 2 years, I believe, have fundamentally changed the dynamics of this debate. As we have seen the weaponization of the IRS, as we have seen the Obama administration using the IRS in a partisan manner to punish its political enemies, in my view, there is a powerful populist instinct to take the 110,000 employees at the IRS, to padlock the building, and to put all 110,000 of them down on our southern border. Now, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But you got to think, look, if you were coming illegally into this country, if you had traveled hundreds or thousands of miles in the grinding heat, if you swam across the Rio Grande and the first thing you saw was 110,000 IRS agents, you'd turn around and go home too. It may well be the case that we won't succeed in abolishing the IRS and adopting a flat tax with Barack Obama in the White House. We may have to wait 2 years for a Republican president to lead that fight. But what we can do in the interim is we can one after the other tee up simplification of the tax code, make the burden easier, reduce the burdens, reduce the power of Washington, which produces growth, which unchains the citizenry and weakens the coercive power of Washington. Number 7, we need to audit the Federal Reserve. You know, one of the most corrosive things we have seen over the last 6 years has been an easy money policy. QE1, QE2, QE infinity. And I'm reminded of John Edwards' speech, Two Americas. John Edwards, in this respect, was right. Another sentence rarely said in Heritage. If you go to Wall Street, if you go to those with wealth and power who walk the corridors of power in the Obama administration, the conventional view is easy money is great. The conventional view is we're not seeing significant inflation. But I'll tell you, if you go talk to working men and women, if you go talk to an Hispanic laborer, like my father was when he came to this country, if you go talk to a single mom who's waiting tables at a diner, they've seen the price of milk go up, price of chicken go up, price of ground beef go up. They had seen until recently the price of gasoline go up. They've seen the price of electricity go up. They've seen their health insurance. They were promised a $2,500 cut. Instead, they've seen it rise over $3,000 a family. And they've also seen median wages stagnate for some 2 decades now. If you're a single mom trying to pay the bills and the cost of everything you're spending keeps going up and up and up and up, and the one thing that doesn't move is your paycheck every 2 weeks, you're feeling the consequence of Washington's easy money policies. We need stable, consistent, strong monetary policies. Number 8. It is long past time for us to pass a strong, balanced budget amendment. Take it up, vote on it, and pass it. What we're doing to our kids and grandkids right now, in my view, is fundamentally irresponsible. And by the way, this is not a particularly conservative view. This is basic common sense. Get out of this God-forsaken town and go to anywhere in America and talk to real live people. Doesn't matter what party, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, and lay out some basic principles. Live within your means. Don't bankrupt our kids and grandkids. Follow the Constitution. There's nary a room in this country outside of Washington, D.C., where the entire room wouldn't agree with those. It's only in Washington that when you say we should stop piling debt higher and higher and higher and higher on our kids, that statement is viewed as radical, extreme. It's only the views of the vast majority of Americans. It's only basic common sense. When Barack Obama became president 6 years ago, our national debt was just over $10 trillion. Today it's $18 trillion. It's larger than the size of our entire economy. Once and for all of the Republicans who campaigned saying, we're going to stop bankrupting our kids and grandkids, let's stand up and follow through and actually do that. And the best way to do that is to put in the Constitution strong protections to prevent Congress from continuing to dig this hole deeper and deeper and deeper. Number 9, we need to repeal Common Core. We need to get the federal government out of the business of dictating educational standards. That would be the NSA interested in what we're saying. You know, education is far too important for it to be governed by unelected bureaucrats in Washington. It should be at the state level or even better at the local level. And we need to, at the same time, embrace and champion school choice for every child in America. Every child has a right to access a quality education regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of religion, regardless of socioeconomic status. In my view, school choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And I got to say the differences on this issue are stark. New York Mayor's Bill de Blasio, one of the first things he did was go up and try to throw young African American kids out of the schools that were performing for them in Harlem. It's a sad thing to see politicians more interested in pleasing the union bosses who are writing checks to him than in taking care of the kids who desperately want hope and a ray of opportunity for the future. It's a sad thing to see the U.S. Department of Justice coming against young African American and Hispanic kids in Louisiana saying, we're going to try to shut down your opportunity to get access to a better education. We're coming up on Martin Luther King Day. I can think of nothing that would be a greater legacy for Dr. King than for us to embrace across parties, across race, across lines, that we are united in saying every kid has a right to a quality education, regardless of who they are. And finally, we've got to deal seriously with the twin threats of ISIS and a nuclear Iran. Listen, these are dangerous times. This past week, we've been stunned to see radical Islamic terrorists murdering innocents in Paris. Our hearts weep for the journalists wrongfully murdered, for the police officers targeted and murdered, for the Jewish customers at a grocery store, murdered because of who they are. And this is part and parcel of a longer pattern across the globe. In recent months, we have seen radical Islamic terrorists attacking in Sydney, in Canada. In Israel, Hamas terrorists coming in with butcher knives and murdering Israeli-American rabbis in synagogue as they prayed. We've seen ISIS beheading journalists. We've seen the Taliban murdering school children in Pakistan. We've seen Boko Haram kidnapping little girls and murdering thousands. These are not isolated incidents. These are not challenges for law enforcement. This is a concerted, radical, dangerous attack that seeks to undermine the very basis of free civilization. Look at who they're targeting. Journalists, children, police officers. And they don't discriminate between Americans, Israelis, Parisians. They target the West. And yet you cannot win a war against radical Islamic terrorism with an administration that is unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. These were not a bunch of ticked-off Presbyterians. And we will not effectively combat what we're facing until we acknowledge what we are facing. Now, I will note just recently, President al-Sisi in Egypt gave a courageous and an important speech. For a Muslim leader, he stood up and he urged peaceful Muslims to stand up against this corruption of their faith that is urging people to murder in the name of faith. And that starts to lay out. We need allies who will take this on. But I got to say, it is hard to enlist the support of allies when America ceases being a good ally. How sad was it in the streets of Paris as 40 world leaders walked down the street? Absent was the United States of America. Where was the president? Where was the vice president? Where was the Secretary of State? Where was the Attorney General who had been there moments before, but chose to get on a plane and fly back home? You know, all of us remember September 11th, 2001. I was living here in Washington, D.C., just south of the Pentagon. My wife was working in the White House. I remember her having to pull off her shoes and walk barefoot across Memorial Bridge because she couldn't get to her car. I remember the putrid stink in the air of the smoldering Pentagon. I will say, in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, nations across the world came and stood with America. The nation of France stood with America. It was sad and unfortunate that we have not seen that same leadership from this administration now. And I would note that that lack of seriousness of purpose, that lack of resolve is profoundly dangerous. It's dangerous because it encourages radical Islamic terrorists to redouble their efforts, and it's dangerous because nations like Iran see that weakness. The single gravest threat to our national security is the threat of Iran acquiring nuclear weapon capability. And this administration seems bound and determined to go down the road of a foolhardy deal. Indeed, the Deputy National Security Advisor of this administration described that an Iran nuclear deal would be the Obamacare of the second term. Those are his words. So that's a comforting commitment. One of the things I hope we see from this new majority in Congress is meaningful oversight and leadership to restore America's leadership in the world. I hope we see Congress hold this administration accountable and do everything we can so that we stand with our friends and allies and we demonstrate the resolve that is necessary to stand up to those who pose serious threats to the national security of this country, to those who would seek to murder innocent Americans. That's what we need from a Republican majority, is bold, positive leadership on jobs, on liberty, on security. We need to demonstrate that we believe the words we said on the campaign trail. We need to demonstrate that we will actually fight for the men and women of America and not simply for the growing power of Washington, D.C. That's what this conference is about. So I want to close the way I started by simply saying to each of you, thank you. Thank you for urging this majority to earn the mandate we've been given. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz. Very much appreciate that. Senator Cruz has some time for a few questions, but before we move into questions, I just want to do a brief housekeeping update. Representative Jordan will be here soon and was actually able to get off his plane earlier, so we're going to have Representative Jordan come up. He's going to give a speech about conservative action in this next Congress in 2015. And then after him, we'll have our freshman members of Congress have a panel. So as awesome as Senator Cruz is, please also stick around and don't everybody follow him out the door, because you're going to learn a lot from these House members about the things that you're going to be hearing about in 2016 and 2017 because of the actions they take on the House floor this year. So anyway, questions for Senator Cruz? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Senator Cruz, thank you so much for everything. Appreciate it very much. But you talked about teeing up legislation to break down Obamacare and all these other different things to push something forward. One of our real concerns as a citizen is the leadership that's going to do it. I do not have confidence in our leadership in the House of Representatives or the Senate, and are we going to have leaders who are going to rise up and do that and really put their mind to it just as a business is trying to reach a goal? Do we have senators and congressmen going to work towards those goals together?
It is a great question. What I can tell you is I hope so. You know, I think a lot of people across this country naturally distrust politicians. I think that is a very healthy sentiment. I think it is easy for those who've been in Washington a long time to focus on priorities other than the priorities of the American people. When we were campaigning, Obamacare and stopping amnesty were 1 and 2 out of the lips of virtually every Republican candidate. And the voters acted decisively in that direction. What I would encourage our leadership to do is follow through on that. And listen, leadership doesn't care what I or any other member of Congress says. The best way to get leadership to actually follow through on those commitments is for you, is for the men and women in this room, for the people who elected us to make clear that we expect elected officials to follow through. I'll tell you, one of the things I've urged 27 million Texans who I represent to do is hold all of us accountable, including me. Hold us accountable for the promises we made. And that is the way to maximize the likelihood that the majority carries through on the promises we made. I don't know if we will, but you have my word, I'm going to do everything humanly possible to encourage us to do exactly that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Right here.
Yes, sir. My name is Kami, but I'm with the Pakistani Spectator. First of all, thanks for acknowledging what Islamic radical did in Pakistan by killing innocent children. And my question is, since they are killing more Muslim than anybody else, isn't this, and it seemed to be fight between Iran and Saudi Arabia, so isn't it better to leave them alone and kill each other rather than getting involved with them and making our enemy? And my second question, how realistic it is to abolish IRS? Thanks.
Well, there's a lot of substance there. Let's take them one at a time. Listen, I agree with you that, for example, when it comes to Iraq and ISIS, the notion that America would go in there and demand reconciliation and consensus between Sunni and Shiites, who, as you know, have been vigorously disagreeing since 632 AD, is the height of ignorance and hubris. We're not going to do that, and it's not our job to bring about peace and tranquility across the globe. It is our job to protect the national security interest of the United States and of our allies. And where it becomes a discrete issue for us is twofold. Number one, with regard to ISIS. They have declared their intention to murder Americans, and with the land they have seized, roughly the size of Indiana, with the ability to capture potentially billions in oil revenue, they're qualitatively dangerous, and we need to act to protect our national security. And secondly, with regard to Iran, if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons capability, in my view, the danger is qualitatively different. That the risks are unacceptably high. That an Iranian regime with nuclear weapons would use those nuclear weapons. And the best case scenario is it sets off a nuclear arms race throughout the Middle East as Arab countries throughout the Middle East rush to acquire or develop nuclear weapons to counterbalance Iran's, and that makes the entire world much more dangerous. So I don't think we should do what sometimes the Obama administration suggests their objective is, which is produce or try to produce political harmony and cause those who are battling to lay down their arms and sing Kumbaya. But I do think we need serious resolve to protect this country. The second question, is it realistic to abolish the IRS? It may not be with President Obama in the White House. It's hard to imagine a scenario where he would sign legislation to do that. But one of the great things about our political process is there are things that today may not be realistic that tomorrow can become realistic with a political movement behind them. I would note, if we got in that Michael J. Fox DeLorean I made reference to, and instead of going back to October 2014, we went back to October 1980. When Ronald Reagan was running for president at the time, if I were to have told you in October 1980, if Reagan gets elected, he is going to pass fundamental tax reform with, by the way, the Democrats, with Tip O'Neill. He's going to cut the top marginal rate from 70%, it'll go all the way down to 28%. The economy is going to grow from what had been 4 years of stagnation, 79 to 81, averaging less than 1% growth. To by 1984, the economy will grow 7.2% a year, booming growth, lifting millions out of poverty to opportunity. If I would have said that then, the answer would have been, that's not realistic at all. If I would have said in October 1980, when the learned observers were saying the Soviet Union is unstoppable, when the president was saying we need to accept malaise, if I would have told you that President Reagan is going to rebuild our military and put so much pressure on the Soviet Union that the Soviet Union will collapse and the Berlin Wall would be torn to the ground, in October 1980, the answer would have been, that's not realistic at all. Come now, how can you say such a thing? So I agree, abolishing the IRS is major reform. But I don't think it's anywhere near as difficult as what we were able to accomplish in the 1980s. And I also believe if the American people say enough is enough is enough, we can fund our federal government, but we don't have to empower bureaucrats over our lives, that the impossible becomes possible with the American people behind it.
I think we have time for one more question. And sorry, that's fine, right here, back here. Yeah, sure.
Garth Kant, WorldNet Daily. With the current administration releasing U.S. enemies from Gitmo and trying to put General Petraeus in jail, is it too provocative to ask whether there's a question as to which side we're on?
You know, I would frame it a little differently, which is this administration has a very difficult time differentiating good guys from bad guys. You know, one of the striking things as you travel the world is our friends and allies quite consistently will pull you aside, defense ministers, heads of state, foreign ministers, and in hushed tones they will say, "Where is America? What has happened?" Look, we saw this just yesterday in Paris. Quite literally, where is America? For 6 years, we have abandoned our friends and allies. And at the same time, and that has been true across the globe, by the way, whether it is France, whether it is Canada, our largest trading partner, where this administration has, for example, blocked the Keystone Pipeline for years, despite the thousands of jobs it would generate both in Canada and the United States. Whether it is the United Kingdom, exemplified by the opening weeks of the administration sending Churchill's bust back. Or whether it is the shameful treatment of the nation of Israel. The Obama administration has been the most antagonistic administration to the nation of Israel in history. Consistently, this administration has refused to stand by our friends and allies. And at the same time, when it comes to our enemies, when it comes to the bad guys, whether it is thugs like Putin, who you recall the administration began by canceling the anti-ballistic missile batteries in Poland and the Czech Republic in an effort to appease Putin. We all recall the president's words to Mr. Medvedev. Tell Putin I'll have more flexibility after the election. How's that worked out? Or whether it is the treatment of Iran. We're allowing billions of dollars to flow into Iran while they continue to build centrifuges and enrich uranium. Or whether it is recently the nation of Cuba, where the president suddenly embraced the Castro communist regime that has murdered and tortured its citizens, doing so in a way that caused the Castros to celebrate their embrace from the president. Or whether it is when it comes to radical Islamic terrorism. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton saying we just need a little bit more empathy. No, we don't need empathy for radical Islamic terrorists. We need the resolve to stop them. The consistent pattern is this administration is unable or unwilling to distinguish between friend and foe. And the sad reality right now is our friends do not trust us, and our enemies do not fear us. That is a dangerous state of affairs for the United States, and it's a dangerous state of affairs for the world, and it needs to change. Thank you.
Senator, thank you. All right, thank you, folks. All right, we're going to go right on into our next panel now. Well, it's not a panel; it's a speech. I'm going to begin now by introducing Jim Jordan. After everyone gets through with their pictures. All right. So, folks, Jim Jordan is our next speaker. He does not need a long introduction. You know him well. He's been a very reliable friend of ours on Capitol Hill. And let me just say this about Jim, and then I'll introduce him and get him on here. Aside from the fact that he's great on policy, that he's courageous and all of that kind of stuff, Jim is a friend. He's a friend, and he's a trustworthy person. When Jim says he's going to go to the mat for you on an issue, he goes to the mat for you on an issue. And he's always there and always can be relied on. So we're very lucky to have him here. What we've asked him to do is come in and talk about 2015 a little bit, talk about the challenges we face as conservatives. Jim's going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then we'll bring in the freshman panelists, and we'll hear from them. And then we'll open it up for questions. Please join me in welcoming Jim Jordan to the panel.
Thank you. I think I spoke here last time. I said don't clap. You haven't heard me say anything yet, but it's good to be with you. Thank you, Tim. I had a coach in college, one of those coaches who always wanted to challenge his student athletes with statements of inspiration, motivational statements, and he always talked about commitment to excellence. And he had one line that he liked. He says, "Commitment by definition is total and complete, and if it is compromised, then it's not commitment." And the thing I admire so much about Heritage, Jim DeMint, Tim Chapman, Mike Needham, and the whole crew here, and all of you who support it, is they are committed totally and completely to the defense of freedom and free markets. And they are uncompromising in their effort to make sure liberty is defended. And that is important. You think about where we're at today in America. There are serious attacks on fundamental liberty, serious attacks on freedom. And actually, I think they take two forms. There's just the straight-on direct assault we see. Think about Obamacare and its attack on your First Amendment religious liberty rights. Think about the Internal Revenue Service, which the Senator was just talking about. The IRS direct attack on your most fundamental right. Now think about this. Your most fundamental right under the First Amendment is your right to speak in a political nature against the policies of your government, and that was systematically targeted over a sustained period of time by this Internal Revenue Service. Think about the third example, maybe more recent. President's executive amnesty issue back in November relative to people who came here illegally, and the fundamental assault that is on the Constitution and the separation of powers. So there's a direct attack on liberty, and Heritage, and all of you who are part of Heritage, are supporting defending liberty in that direct assault we see. But there's also the indirect and more subtle way. And that's what this conference is about. And that's this idea that your government can take your money and play favorites with it. And that is wrong as well. And it's an attack on freedom and liberty as well. It could be cronyism or corporate welfare or handouts to the industry of the month, the green energy industry as an example, and it is just as wrong as the direct attack. My coach also would talk about this, talked about commitment, but he also talked about setting goals and making sure you can accomplish big things. And he said this: "We accomplish in proportion to what we attempt." And the idea is, if you set small goals, you're not likely to accomplish big things. If you have big, bold objectives, again, like Senator Cruz was just talking about, like Ronald Reagan did, you got a chance. May not happen, but at least you have the opportunity and the chance to accomplish big and bold things. I was telling some folks earlier today that there's a big football game tonight, and there's a team from Ohio playing. My guess is at the start of the season, the Buckeyes probably had the goal of being national champions, just like Oregon probably set the goal of being national champions. Now, there's lots of other teams set the same goal, but the idea is if you set a big goal, you got a chance to accomplish it. And Oregon and Ohio State are getting a chance to maybe make that dream a reality tonight. If you set small goals, you're not going to get there. You can think about it. If Urban Meyer said, our goal is just to win one game, we're going to beat Michigan this year. Heck, everybody can beat Michigan this year, right? So if that was your only goal, that was it is that fundamental. I think we're at one of those points where it is important for the party I belong to, particularly in this Congress after the election we just had in November, to be big and bold. Now think about it. Can you imagine? What if the Republican Party said, we're going to stop the cronyism, We're going to stop the favoritism. We're going to end the Export-Import Bank. Now think about, this is something that's been around for 80 years. Billions and billions of your tax money given to some of the most powerful, large, profitable corporations in the world, and we say we're going to stop it? What if we said we're going to throw out the entire tax code? I mean, everyone knows the tax code benefits big government, big corporations. Tax code benefits big unions. Tax code benefits big lobbying firms here in Washington, D.C. Tax code benefits big law firms here in Washington, D.C. But what about regular middle-class families? What if we said instead of having all that take place, we're going to represent regular middle-class families? And so I want you to think here just for a few minutes about two people I'm going to describe. And my guess is these two people are two people all across this country, and they've went through the same or similar experience several times over the last 6 years. Two people I want you to think about. The first is a guy who, this afternoon, walked out to get in his truck because he worked second shift at the local auto plant. And he walks out to get in his truck, and remember, second shift, which means he's going to miss some of his kids' soccer games after school. During the summer, he misses some of his kids' Little League games. He can't always make the school play he'd like to see when his kids are in that. But he's working hard, second shift, at the local auto factory. And as he's going out to get in his truck to drive to work, he sees his neighbor a couple houses down. And his neighbor's sitting on the front porch, drinking a cup of coffee. He knows that his neighbor can work, but he's not. And he's getting some kind of benefit from the taxpayer. Food stamps, some kind of compensation from the taxpayer. As he's driving off work, he sees his neighbor sitting there drinking his coffee, knowing he can work, but he's not, and he's getting some kind of social welfare benefit. And as he's driving to work, he turns on the radio and he hears a newscast, and the newscaster and the reporter comes on and says this. Says, federal government's got a $17 trillion national debt, and there's some program that they started that gives money to corporations because they're in the favorite industry of the government. And this one particular corporation got millions and millions of taxpayer money, and then it went bankrupt. So he hears all this as he's driving to work second shift at the local factory. And guess what? He is ticked off. And he has every right to be, right? So the same time he's driving to work, there's a lady driving home from the elementary school who taught second grade. And she cares about her students. She was busting her tail, teaching those kids to read. She views it as her mission. Education, teaching young people to read, to write, their multiplication tables. It's her mission field to help those students who she's charged with educating. She worked hard all day, and as she's driving home, she's got her radio on, and she hears the same newscast where the news reporter says, federal government's got a $17 trillion national debt, and there's some program where they give her hard-earned tax dollars to big favored corporations, and one of those companies went bankrupt and lost tens of millions of dollars. And as she's hearing that newscast, pulling into her driveway on the same street, she sees the same guy sitting on his front porch, drinking a cup of coffee, who can work, but won't work, and is getting her tax money in some kind of social welfare benefit. And guess what? She's ticked off too, and she has every right to be. Those two people, and millions of them around the country just like them, are who we are supposed to represent. That's what this entire conference is about. Not showing favoritism, but providing opportunity, respecting freedom and free markets for people like the second grade teacher and the second shift worker. That's who we're supposed to represent. And I think we're at one of those rare moments where our party had better understand what is at stake. We had better get it. Because I think those two people, you know what I think they did this November? And the millions of folks around the country just like them? I think a bunch of them said, I'm not even going to vote. I think they stayed home. But I also think there was a significant number of people like the second grade teacher and the second shift worker that I just described who said, you know what? I am going to vote. And when they went to the polls, I think they said this. We know the Democrats have forgotten us. We know they don't represent us. They're for big government. They're for top-down structure. They're for special interests. They're for group politics. They don't believe in the individual. They don't believe in the... We know they have abandoned us. We know they don't remember us. We know they're not standing up for us. But we think maybe, just maybe, that other party might. We suspect they don't. We suspect they're tax cuts for the rich and big corporations and Wall Street. We suspect that's where they're at. But we think maybe, just maybe, Republicans might remember who I am and actually stand up for me. And I would argue that is our charge as we start this Congress. Our job, if the first thing our Republican Party does, the majority in the House and the majority in the Senate, is trade promotion authority, repeal the medical device tax, and corporate tax reform, if that's the first thing we do, or frankly, if it's the only thing we do, what is that second grade teacher and that second shift worker going to say? I knew I was right. I knew no one represented me. Our charges, and look, I'm for those things. Those are good policies. But they shouldn't be the first thing, or they're certainly not the only thing we do. We should be putting in place and fighting for those policies you've all been talking about this entire conference. The Expand Act, which is going to actually expand more energy opportunities. The RAISE Act, which Rakita has, which is going to have labor union reform that actually empowers the individual. School choice. Throwing out the tax code. Think about the tax code. I mean, think about this. Any tax code on the personal side which says to half the population you're not going to participate in the main tax is broken. Any tax code on the corporate side which says to American companies you're going to pay the highest corporate rate, the highest rate in the world, is stupid. So if you have a tax code that's both broken and stupid, you might want to throw it out and start over, right? Why not do that? And guarantee the second grade teacher and the second shift worker, they understand that. They know the tax code is rigged against them and it's rigged for special interest. So let's throw it out. Can you imagine if we would do that as a party, embrace bold and big ideas, how we could capture, it would be so positive. Finally, two last things, and then I'll take your questions. In the story, we also can't forget the other person in the story. The guy sitting on the front porch drinking the coffee. One of the things we need to do, and I think I talked about this at this podium about a year ago, is we need to require work for people who get a benefit from the taxpayer. It treats the taxpayers who pay for it with the respect they deserve, but more importantly, it helps that individual get to a better life. And I know I did this last time I was here, about a year ago. I want you all to think about, go through an exercise with me. Think about the very first job you had. Was it delivering papers? Was it babysitting your cousins? Watching the neighbor kids down the street? Was it waitress, waiter? For me, my brother, the first job we had was we lived out in the country. We mowed 20 country lawns. Had to mow them every week. And think about the skill set, the values, the principles you learned in that job, making less than minimum wage, but which helped you get to your position you're at in life today. I mean, I think we had, my dad helped us. We got started. He had an old truck and a trailer. And we had a riding mower on the back, and we had a toolbox, a push mower, weed eater, gas cans. I mean, we driving down the road, we looked like the Beverly Hillbillies. And he told us, he said, I'll help you get started. But after that, you got to pay for the gas in the truck and in the mowers through the profits you make. You got to maintain the equipment. You're screwing around, you're busting belts and pulleys and things. You're going to pay for that. You learn to handle things. You learn to manage a schedule. I mean, we had 20 yards. You had to get them all in a week, and we had other you learn to schedule things, deal with people skills. We had some, I always remember this because we had certain customers who wanted their lawn mowed on Thursday because they wanted it looking nice for the weekend. And we figured out they'd pay a little bit more if you mowed it on Thursday. So guess what? We mowed them on Thursday. I mean, we weren't stupid, right? You learn, and you learn those important people skills that help you as you move on in life and get to other employment. We had, I always remember, two ladies, never married, two sisters, the Steinberger sisters. Nice ladies, and typically when you pull into a place, you just pull in, get after, start unloading, and get to work because you had a lot to do. But we learned with the Steinberger sisters, it was worth your time before you started to go up to the door, say hello, tell them you're going to mow their lawn today, talk to them for just a few minutes, because as sure as you did that, about the time you're finishing up, trimming around the house, you could smell the chocolate chip cookies that they were making. people skills you get. I mean, and the point is, that guy sitting on the front porch, getting something for nothing. We are depriving him of what we all learned in those very first occupations. And it's something our party has to be willing to talk about in a productive way and say, you know what? The taxpayers who pay for the benefits deserve that. More importantly, the guy receiving them deserves it as well, because we want to help him or her get to a better position in life. Finally, the last thing I'd say is this. Same coach of mine who talked about commitment, who talked about setting appropriate goals, also had another line to use that I never forgot. He said to me, he said, Jim, you know, there are moments in everyone's life that have special significance, moments of real meaning, moments you never forget. And he called them moments of magnitude, moments of important significance and meaning. And you can think about it. Think about your own life. Moments you'll never. I think about the day I was married, like 100 degrees in a little Methodist church in Westville, Ohio with no air conditioning. I mean, you remember the day you're married. I've got 4 kids. Remember the day each of them was born. I'll remember this when our son-in-law called us and told us that our first grandchild's name was Elizabeth. There's moments as an individual you just don't forget. Your kids got certain goals they want to achieve, and they actually work hard and they accomplish it. You'll remember forever. Sometimes those moments of magnitude, moments of significance and real meaning are bigger and broader in context. And they apply not just to an individual, not just to a family, but they can apply to an entire political party. And I would argue we're at one of those now. We have to decide what kind of party we're going to be. Are we going to be this party that sort of plays this game, and yet, yeah, we're for free markets, and yeah, we're for individual liberty, but we also want to have these special deals for corporations and this favoritism and this cronyism? Are we going to be a party who remembers we're supposed to fight for that second grade teacher and that second shift worker at the local auto plant? If we remember those things, I think we'll be doing the right thing, and we'll get off on the right foot in this Congress, and more importantly, help set a framework and a context for 2016 where our nominee can win. Finally, I do mean it this time. I said it once before, but I mean it this time. My favorite scripture, and I always share this because it is my favorite. 2 Timothy 4:7, Paul writes to Timothy, and he says this, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. And it is a verse that I think has always applied to America, because it's a verse of action. Fight, finish, keep. But it's a verse we as a party I belong to, need to adopt. We need to fight for those middle-class workers who think no one represents them. We need to finish that job, and we need to keep faith with the principles of Reagan, the principles that made our party great in the first place. And if we do that, I think we're going to have a good Congress. More importantly, we're going to have a good election in 2016. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. We're gonna speed through. We're gonna skip the Q&A because we have another panel right now. We're a little bit behind, and I would like y'all to be able to do Q&A during that time. And if for whatever reason, Jim, you want to stick around, you always can. But I think you have a 5:30 on your because you could always join us. But thank you. All right, let's see here. Let me introduce this panel. Jim just quoted scripture. I'm going to quote G.K. Chesterton, and we'll see how that goes. The reason I like this quote is it says a lot about, I think, this freshman class that's coming in. This is a quote from his book, Orthodoxy. When the businessman rebukes the idealism of his office boy, it's commonly in some speeches this. Ah, yes, when one is young, one has these ideals in the abstract and these castles in the air. But in the Middle Age, they all break up like clouds, and one comes down to a belief in practical politics, to using the machinery one has and getting on with the world as it is. Thus, at least, venerable and philanthropic old men, now in their honored graves, used to talk to me when I was a boy. But since then, I've grown up, and I've discovered that these philanthropic old men were telling lies. What has really happened is exactly the opposite of what they said would happen. They said that I should lose my ideals and begin to believe in the methods of practical politicians. Now I have not lost my ideals in the least. My faith in the fundamentals is exactly what it always was. What I have lost is my old childlike faith in practical politics. He says, "The vision is always a solid and reliable fact. It is the reality that is often the fraud. As much as I ever did, more than I ever did, I believe in liberalism, but there was a rosy time of innocence when I also believed in liberals." What he's getting at there is pretty important. He's saying, don't lose your ideals. Your ideals are true north. They're real. All the stuff that's going to get thrown at you when you're in Washington, all of it changes every single day with every single different circumstance. And I really love this freshman class because this class is a class that has talked about ideals. It's talked about true north. And it has a sense and a purpose amongst it that is important, that says we're not going to play the game in Washington as usual. There are two modes of thought about what this last election meant, and you heard Senator Cruz talk about them a little bit. One is that this election means it's time to govern. It's time to show people we can get stuff done. That's the wrong one. The real thing that we know that this election was about was the American people are tired of the game. They want politicians who will stand up for them and who will never lose sight of the ideal. So I love this group that we have coming up here because they are all right there in that. So I would invite our panelists to come up. We have Dave Bratt from Virginia, Ken Buck from Colorado, Barry Loudermilk from Georgia, Gary Palmer from Alabama, and John Ratcliffe from Texas. Thank you all. Come on up. And actually, Ken Buck actually had to cancel at the last minute, so I'll take his spot right there, and he's presiding on the floor, I believe. But I'm going to ask each of our distinguished members here to give 3 or 4 minutes of remarks on what they think the importance of 2014 was. And I know that Congressman Palmer has to take off here in a few minutes for a committee meeting, so we'll start with him.
Thank you, Tim. Pretty exciting after 25 years in the think tank business to be back here with the Heritage Foundation and talk a little bit about what I think my campaign was about to begin with. And on the campaign trail, I would talk to people and tell them that I do not blame liberals for the condition of the country. And that would always, if there was any murmuring in the crowd, small talk, that always stopped everybody. And I don't. I blame us. You look at poll after poll, and we outnumber liberals 2 to 1. They've just been more dedicated, more focused, more willing to sacrifice, more willing to get involved. And that's not exactly the way to endear yourself to voters, to get them to come out when you start telling them it's your fault that we're so screwed up. But people, I think, are looking for honesty. As Tim said, they're tired of the game. When I started the campaign, I pulled my campaign staff together and I said, look, here's what you need to know. We're not going to go negative. No matter what they say, we're not going negative. We're going to run a campaign on ideas. And we're going to run the kind of campaign that when it's over, win, lose, or rain out, the next day we can look in the mirror and see people that we still like. And then the final thing I told them is, you need to understand I'm not afraid to lose. So, because I think we're at a point where we've got to have people that are going to run honest campaigns and talk about solutions, and that's what we did. The other thing is I said we've got to stop talking about how bad everything is. For crying out loud, if there's anybody left in the country that doesn't realize things are pretty bad, I'm not sure another speech is going to make a whole lot of difference. We need, and I need to smile more. People, I try to smile right at the beginning, get that out of the way, and then Laura Ingraham told me if I'd smile, I'd be a nice-looking guy, and I started smiling, and I got elected to Congress. But we needed to talk solutions. There is a way to get our country back on the right track, but you've got to be honest about the solutions. It can't be pie-in-the-sky stuff, and it's not going to happen in one election, as brilliant as these guys are, and I'm honored to serve with these guys. This is a great class. We're not going to solve it in one election, but we're going to start the process. We're going to start that march toward freedom again. And it has to be done. It'll take 20, 25 years to get our fiscal cart out of the ditch and to get some of the structural things corrected that need to be corrected. So I wanted to be honest about present solutions, be honest about the timeline. And then the other thing is that we need to inspire people. And I can tell you that playing the blame game and blaming Pelosi and Reid and Obama, and Lord knows there's plenty to blame them for, is not a winning formula. This idea that Congress is broken and that they wanted bipartisanship and stuff, that's not a winning message. What they want are solutions, they want honesty, but they also want to know that if they get involved, it's worth it. It's hard to get people to charge a hill or hit a beach if they don't think the objective is worth it. And one of the things that I tried to do in every gathering of people is to let them know that our country has seen extraordinarily difficult circumstances before, and we've prevailed. There are some of you in this room that have no clue about this. There are some of you in this room who do, but I would tell people about 1979. I know John Funn remembers 1979. And I'd say, this is not the worst it's been. In 1979, we had double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation. Consumer interest rates were on their way to 21+%. We had a new index called the misery index. It was the unemployment rate plus the inflation rate, and it hit a record height in the spring of 1980. The Soviet Union was in Central America. They were in the Caribbean. They were in Central Africa. And honest conservatives on both, conservatives and liberals both thought that the Soviets very likely would win the Cold War. They were also, by the end of the year, they were in Afghanistan. We had 52 Americans being held hostage in our embassy in Tehran. And Jimmy Carter introduced a new word into the political lexicon, malaise. And literally people thought that the United States had seen her best days. But I tell people that's not all that was happening in 1979. There was a guy named Reagan running for president, turns out successfully so. In May of 79, Margaret Thatcher got elected prime minister. And in June of 79, Pope John Paul II went back to his native land of Poland. And he arrived in Poland on June 2nd. And prior to his arrival, I think my understanding is the KGB initially thought about having him assassinated. There'd been one attempt on his life already, I believe. But they changed their mind. Instead, they pumped atheism into the school system and tried to muzzle the Polish media to limit the number of people who would know he was there. But when he arrived on June 2nd and took his motorcade into Warsaw, by the end of the day, more than 1 million people had gathered, and they were chanting, "We want God." Light will always pierce the darkness. We need to remind people of that. On June 10th, he held a mass outside the city of Krakow in Blany Field, and somewhere between 2 and 3 million people appeared. And he told those people, "You must be strong with the strength that faith gives." He said, "You must be strong with love, which is stronger than death." He said, "Therefore, there is no reason to fear." At the end of his homily, he said, "So I beg you, never lose your trust. Do not be defeated. Do not be discouraged." Peggy Noonan wrote a wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal to eulogize the Pope John Paul II after his death, and said that at that point many historians believed that the fall of the Soviet Union was inevitable. But that's not the rest of the story. Almost 8 years to the day later, on June 12, 1987, Ronald Reagan stood outside the Brandenburg Gate and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall now." What's the point? 17 months later, it's down. If I or any of these colleagues of mine or any of you who were living at that time had gone anywhere in the United States in 1979 and said in 10 years we'll be in the middle of the greatest economic expansion the world's ever seen and the Iron Curtain will be down, people would have thought we were crazy. But the whole world was changing. I believe it's changing again. And this is what I tried to tell people. The whole world is changing. You can either be a part of it or you can miss it. And I'll end with this. And I believe it was his last major speech that Reagan made was to the Republican Convention in 1992 in Houston. And he quoted a guy named James Allen, who had written in his diary that most thinking people believe America has seen her best days. He wrote that July 26, 1775. The whole world was changing right in front of Mr. Allen, and he missed it. So what I would say to you, and what I would encourage you to share with your friends, is that faith is something you need to be strong with. Don't be discouraged. Don't be defeated. Don't give up. This country is worth it. We've been here before, and we can overcome these obstacles again. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Palmer. Appreciate it. Congressman Ratcliffe, we'll just go right down the line.
Well, Tim, thank you. Appreciate the invitation to be here. Let me echo what Gary said. It is a tremendous privilege and honor to be able to serve with a bunch of folks that very quickly we've gotten to know our freshman conservative colleagues, and I think that's the reason that Gary had such a profound and inspiring message, and I think that we all will with respect to the opportunities that lay ahead for conservative solutions. In my case, I ran against a Republican incumbent, a 34-year incumbent who was frankly very well liked. But the reason that I have the opportunity now to serve in Congress was, as Tim said, notwithstanding all of that, what I learned out on the campaign trail is that people are very much discontent with the status quo. There is a feeling out there, and I think that I hope to represent that feeling, and I know that Barry and Dave would tell you the same thing, is that the feeling out there is that Washington is filled with a bunch of career politicians that have come up here, stayed too long, promised too much, and ultimately become part of the problem that they were sent here to fix. People are looking for a different type of representative, and I think that that's something that we all are striving to be and see as a tremendous opportunity. Out there, there is tremendous frustration. I caught the tail end of Congressman Jordan's comments, and I very much found the same thing to be true in the 4th Congressional District of Texas that I'm privileged to represent. I don't have this opportunity because people have fallen back in love with Republicans. Out there in my district, people feel like the Republican Party has been focused too much on the top 1%, that there's been too much corporate cronyism, corporate welfare, and corporate bailouts. But they're also convinced that the Democrats are focused too much on the bottom 3%, folks that are getting by on entitlements that don't really need them. And what they really feel like in a middle class or middle income district like mine is that no one's fighting for that 96% in between. They see $18 trillion of debt. They see our porous borders. They see too much taxation, too much regulation, and then they see a lawless president that repeatedly tramples our Constitution, and they want to know, will someone finally stand up for us? I campaigned on those issues about being that type of representative, and I think we're off to a great start. I think that we have some great legislation that's coming forward that really does provide conservative solutions where we're going to attack some of the problems that people have had to endure for the last 6 years. The next 2 years is an audition for the Republican Party, for my party. We've got to convince middle America that we can do a better job and that we deserve to have a Republican president, and that if we have a Republican president with a Republican House and a Republican Senate, that we really can get back to the principles of Reagan and the conservative beliefs that we all believe in. So, thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Lattimore.
I served in the State House and the State Senate in Georgia for about 9 years. Excuse me. I had no intention of running for Congress. It was something that I'd never thought of. And then the congressman who was serving in this district decided to run for the Senate unsuccessfully. I actually met in my home with my family, who are all been politically engaged, and we were trying to find that right candidate. This is one of the most conservative districts in the nation, and we're sitting around and we're talking about it, and the more we talked about it, the more my daughter and my 2 sons started saying, "Dad, you need to do this." Of course, that's when all the excuses started coming. Now, I've had a small business that has been struggling over the past several years like everyone else, and we have a nonprofit where we teach these values and the true foundations of American history. And I kept going through all the reasons why I couldn't run, and I finally just told them, I said, look, after years of struggling, especially with our business, we're starting to get comfortable again. And that's when my daughter looked at me in so many words. She said, so God called you to be comfortable. And as we talked about it, she expressed what a lot of people were feeling is, this nation that you've taught me to love, we're losing. And unless we have the right people who are willing to go fight the fight, we're going to lose it. After a lot of consideration and prayer, we decided that this was the direction to go. And as I sat with our campaign team, I said a lot of the things that Gary and others have been saying without coordinating. There was a coordination with all these Republican candidates, these new Republican candidates running, but I started hearing the same theme, is that we need to quit defining ourselves by what we're against. That's what really has defined conservatives for years. We've been defined by what we don't like. Let's be defined by what we're for, and let's come up with solutions. We don't have to convince Americans that their nation is off course. They know it. They're living it. Obamacare is the reality. What we have to do is reinstall hope that we can make a difference, and that's what we started focusing on, is that we can make change. Now, one of the things that I also realized, and we've been talking about ever since the election, is one of the problems we have as conservatives is we have no strategy and we use poor tactics, if you want to use military terms. What is our strategy? You can boil that down to vision. We have a lack of vision. And you know what the scriptures tell us? If you have a lack of vision, you will perish. And we started talking about, what do we want America to look like? Not tomorrow, not next week, not 2 years, not 4 years, but by the year 2030. What do we as conservatives want America to look like? You see, there's a lot of people in my generation, we still remember what America used to be, what it could be, and it can be again. I tell the story of my dad, who, when I was in high school, he worked for a building contractor. He came home from work one day. He said, "I just wanted to tell you I started my own construction business today." And I remember thinking, and I actually asked him, I said, well, how did you do that? He said, well, I went and got a business license and I got the insurance and I'm in business. You know, the founder of Home Depot recently said he could not start Home Depot today in today's regulatory environment. But I remember when I was talking to my dad, I remember exploring it more. I said, that's all you needed to do to start a business? He said, yeah. He said, what's so great about this country? Now, he is a World War II veteran, medic in World War II. He said, what's so great about this nation is that you have the freedom to do whatever you want to do, and government is simply there to protect your rights. So in your pursuit of happiness, you don't violate your neighbor's pursuit of happiness. So I remember thinking, America is so great, you can do whatever you want to do, except for a few things that government is protecting you from, protecting someone else's rights from you violating. But the mentality of the next generation following us is, what will the government let me do? And we started realizing that not only do we have to define what America can be, we have to define it in a way that the generation following us that never experienced that America, that they would understand. I was invited a couple of months ago to speak to one of the colleges in our district to their political science class. And it was a joint political science and marketing or communications class. There was about 75 students in the room, and majority of them were minority. And after speaking to the class, as it turned out, the majority of them were not associated as conservatives or in the Republican Party, at least at the beginning of the program. But as we were there, I realized that something we talked about in the campaign is a lot of times conservatives, we operate in this sphere of the mind. But most voters operate in the sphere of the heart. And we have to connect those two. And so the topic they asked me to speak about was the Bill of Rights. Now, instead of just going down the Bill of Rights, I decided let's talk about what the vision of the Founding Fathers was. What was the character? What was it that they wanted? And what was behind their pursuit of having a Bill of Rights instead of going down through each Bill of Rights? So I wrote up on the whiteboard, I said I can put in one word the whole idea behind the Founding Fathers and their Bill of Rights, and I wrote the word liberty. And we started talking about what liberty meant, and I told them the story of my father starting his own business. And as we progressed in it, I said, now, let me ask you a question. What did the Founding Fathers believe was the greatest enemy to liberty? Went around the room, the British Army, there was other suggestions. But I went back up to the board, and right next to liberty, I wrote government. Our Founding Fathers said that the very thing they were creating was the greatest enemy to what they wanted to achieve. And that's why it had to be limited. And I realized I was starting to connect. So I finally asked the group, I said, how many of you in this room believe that you can achieve the American dream, the traditional American dream of owning a home? Only 3 or 4 people raised their hand, these students. And I asked them why, and they said, we can't afford it. We do not believe we will ever be able to afford to buy a home. So I asked them, I said, how many of you in this room, if I could tell you that tomorrow we could reduce the price of a home by 50%, how many of you believe you could achieve the American dream? And they all raised their hand. I said, well, let me tell you what this enemy to liberty can do by regulating. You see, I was just in a meeting with a home builders association who told me that 60% of the cost of a new home is because of government regulation. It started to hit home with them. We went down a few other scenarios. By the time we got done, a young African-American girl came up to me afterwards and she said, I have grown up in a household of staunch Democrats. My parents are Democrats. I'm a Democrat. You just made a conservative out of me. Now, she didn't say Republican. She said, you just made a conservative out of me. I said, no, ma'am, I didn't. I just let you realize what you already were. Why? Because we changed our messaging and we built a vision, a strategy. That's what we need to be doing as conservatives. We have to convince the generation behind us because, as Gary said, this is a multi-generational task. It took us a long time to sell our liberties away. It's going to take a long time to get it back. We have to be patient. One of the problems that we've had in the past is if we were a football team, the conservatives, every time we got the football, we threw a Hail Mary pass. And if we didn't score, we assassinated the football team when they walked back off the field. You win a football game by moving the ball down the field a little bit at a time to get some first downs, and the first downs will get you touchdowns, and more touchdowns than the other guy, you win the game. We have to be patient. We have to change our mode. We have to have a vision. We have to change our tactics, and we have to be working together. If you look at the liberal side of politics, they don't agree on everything. There's a lot of disagreement, but they have learned to unify behind those things that they want to accomplish. That's how they have achieved that. We have to do the same thing. I still believe in American exceptionalism. I think we have to define what America needs to be by the year 2030. I've told people the most dangerous thing we're facing is an $18 trillion debt. Had several people tell me recently, it's impossible. We can never pay off that kind of debt. I said, well, I still believe in American exceptionalism, which Americans can accomplish anything if they put their mind to it. They have a vision. They know where they're going. They set a goal, and they plot a path to get there. And I said, well, let me ask you this question. If we were back in 1960, and I gave you this choice, which do you think would be the most possible? To pay off an enormous debt or put a man on the moon? Every one of you would have said to pay off a debt. But if I recall, there's only one nation's flag on the face of on the moon. It's the United States of America. Why? Because we set our mind upon a goal. We built an agency to manage. If you think about it, it was the private sector that got us to the moon. NASA managed the contractors who had the ingenuity and the technology, and they didn't stop till they got it done. I still believe American exceptionalism is there, and I think it's just we have to spark that in not only this generation, but the new generation, and we can restore America so our kids will have a country that's free, safe, and full of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Brett.
All right, thank you, Tim. They saved the professor for last. You all ready for an hour of detailed talking points? I'll try to keep it brief. I see some young people out there, so that's good sign. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at Heritage. Anybody that opens with Chesterton, I'm a fan, of course. And then my freshman crew here I came in with, it's been just a great ride so far, and I think we're going to do great things for all the reasons you've heard. And I think Heritage framed a nice session here as to what the American people wanted. And I think you've heard from all of us what they want is people with ideals that stick to principles. And so I'll just give you my opening stump speech in a few points, and then I'll close. But whenever I gave my stump speech, I give my background. So I went to Princeton Seminary, and then I went to American University up here for my PhD in economics. And then on the stump speech, I'd always open and said, I'm running to put economics and ethics together. And that's not a joke, right? So people take that as an oxymoron. How in the world can you put economics and ethics together? And not only put them together, but our founders knew that, right? Everybody, they all held those principles tightly and unified. But I said, not only am I going to try to do that, I think you can predict all of my future votes pretty simply, right? And I actually mean that, right? I would take Adam Smith, free market economics, and put it together with James Madison, who's from my district, right? And I got some friends in the front row and back there in my district, so they're going to hold me truthful here. Hello, 7th of Virginia. And if you put those two together, right, Adam Smith and James Madison, who authored the Constitution, you can predict my votes. And I actually mean that, right? So, and I think my class means the same thing. We intend to act out on those principles, and if you do that, the people back home will say, hey, they're sticking to their principles, they're announcing what they're doing, they're reporting home how they're voting, and either they're going to buy it or they're not going to buy it. And if we stick to our principles, it's harder for the other side to knock you down with sound bites, and you just say, I told you exactly what I'm going to do and how I'm going to vote. And so those are the utopian principles and ideals we're trying to hang to. And then I ran on 3 issues that concern the young people in the room primarily. The debt's $18 trillion. And then go to the bottom of the debt clock, and you'll see the unfunded liabilities. They're $127 trillion. And our budget is about 1/3 discretionary and 2/3 non-discretionary, right? So that the entitlements are in that 2/3 that are in law. You can't change that spending piece until you change the law. And just to give you a sense of what $127 trillion means, those 4 programs will take up the entire budget by 2030, right? So the other side will run negative ads against us and say, you're threatening these systems and seniors, et cetera. False. Those systems are insolvent by 2030. They're broke, right? They're broke. They're insolvent. Our budget's gone. If you want to know why education and the military and everything's being crimped, it's because those 4 programs are already intruding on the discretionary piece. And so that's a huge piece. I've taught students in the classroom for the last 20 years. I've encouraged them, and you young folks I see out there, who's the only group up here that doesn't have a lobbyist that's doing the job? Your generation, right? So Madison intended this to be a government of factions, and competing factions are a good thing, right? Free market capitalism relies on a large number of competing firms and factions. And so I encourage, one of you can make a lot of money doing it, right? Represent your generation, get up here and get a working coalition together on that issue, $127 trillion. You got a good talking point to start off with. Then I ran on Obamacare a year ago when it was kind of theoretical. Now the bill's in the mailbox. It's not theoretical. Who watched 60 Minutes last night? Y'all watching football. You can hear I'm a little sick, so I was bundled up watching 60 Minutes. Good. Go Google the thing on Obamacare. But the bill's in the mailbox. Everybody's seeing it now, right? It's one thing to, in theory, be trying to sell the thing. Gruber helped us out. He's in my economics profession. And he helped us out by pointing to the arrogance of the top-down economic philosophy on the other side, right? The kind of the fatal conceit to think you're going to run 20% of this economy as a command economy without using prices and the price system is the fatal conceit. And unfortunately, we bought into that, and we're going to all pay the price because that will take a while to turn around. But I think you've heard good news on this panel. And then finally, I ran on illegal immigration and amnesty, and that started off with just kind of a cheap labor argument, and then morphed into kids coming across the border, 50 to 100,000 kids. And then it morphed into even worse case of national security concerns, et cetera. Now it's all the above. And I couldn't believe someone could be on the other side of this, right? And there's just too much common sense. And then it morphed into the president doing an illegal end run around it, right? Unconstitutional. He said it's unconstitutional over and over and over. And I always go back to my free market principles and my seminary background on that issue because the left tries to fake us all out and get all confused on whatever on that issue as if we don't like people or something like that, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And so when it comes to immigration, in this town, it all starts with data and talking points, right? No one ever backs it up to the initial logic, right? Why does everybody want to come to this country in the first place? That's the question, right? Because we're rich. How do we get rich? Because we got the Chesterton Judeo-Christian tradition. The rule of law emerged uniquely. Individual rights emerged uniquely in that context, and free markets emerged even more uniquely in that context in only a subset of countries, right? And so if you want to help people, we're arguing at the margin about 1 million people or something like this, small ball. If you want to help 8 billion people on this planet who are all children of God, and I believe that, right? If you want to help 8 billion people on this planet, what should you do? You should promote the rule of law and free markets in the home countries, right? That's what we did with our arch enemies after World War II. It worked. Now they're our friends. It seems like that's pretty good evidence. And to let the other side cast us as not caring is false. We have all the data on our side. We've grown our economy. We're the richest nation on earth. All the countries that follow the principles I'm talking about are doing well. And so I am optimistic as well. We can do it. We have done it. But we better stay true to those fundamental principles that got us here. Heritage has been fighting the fight for a long time, so I'm standing on huge, broad shoulders, and a lot of people have done all the legwork and grassroots people out there who helped me in my campaign. So I would spread that. I'd have young people on my campaign. They'd go start yelling at people at the door once in a while. I said, don't yell at them. I said, just go up to the door and say, are we going in the right direction or not? Right? That's all you got to do. Right? Just go up to people, start, are we going in the right direction or not? And so Heritage hit it out of the park on having this session. How did we win? What did we run on? We did run on the principles and the ideals that have made this nation great. They're not in dispute as far as I know, but it takes courage to stand up and say that. And so thank you all for having us here, and I think we're happy to take a few questions before we have to go vote.
Thank you, Congressman. Okay, questions? Yes, sir. We got one right here, John.
I'd like to ask Congressman Bratt, you're one of the few economics professors who's been in Congress. You've obviously watched Congress for a long time. What basic economics 101 principles do they either not know or have completely forgotten or just abandoned?
Yeah, well, I get that, and I open up with free market economics and ethics, and I don't think it's a lack of knowledge up here. There's plenty of people smarter than me up here, right? And we had Dick Armey and Phil Graham and people before us. So I think it has more to do with the political courage rather than the economic knowledge. When it comes to unfunded liabilities and the debt, we all know the problems, balance the budget, these kind of things. And so I don't think there's any mystery on the economics. It's just we heard Jim Jordan and my colleagues here say it takes courage to stand up to special interests. And when you're running race and you want to win, it's easier maybe to go to a few big purses than a lot of small purses. And so for me, it's not so much the economic knowledge, it's just the political courage to stand up and state the truth in public and educate. I think that is the economic education of everybody. In K to 12, the K to 12 kids cannot tell you what a business is. So that's an issue. I don't think it has to do with people up here, but the kids back home in K to 12 education can't tell you what a business is. That's a problem for workforce skills, et cetera. Thanks.
Anyone else want to field that? Okay. All right, we'll go right here.
You're Congressman Brandt. I want to congratulate you, Congressman Brandt. Thank you for beating Congressman Cantor.
Oh, thank you very much.
I just got back from Southern California real quick, and I voted for Prop 8, which got turned over, as you know, by an unjust judge. And I could go on talk about the illegal immigration problem for hours. They've closed 8 of the hospitals. They're 34% of taking of the. I know a Czechoslovakian man who had hired some undocumented. He said, I found out that one of them was his grandmother was coming up from Guadalajara getting a check once a month. I mean, you multiply that by tens of thousands of times, and. I met a lady from the Philippines who and her husband had been a veteran for fought in the World War II, and they were waiting 11 years for an immigration and naturalization number. I mean, I could go down to MacArthur Park and get each and every one of you a new ID. I mean, if you pass immigration reform, it'll really. I just don't see this country recovering. I'm with Ann Coulter. I just can't. I hope you don't. I pray to God that you don't. And you realize, I mean, I'm an immigrant. I mean, I'm a grandson I'm Jewish, and I'm a minority, and so there are more Mexicans fought for America in the Mexican-American War against America. That's in the North Hollywood subway. I mean, this isn't about race. It's about right and wrong. I believe Republican Congress should stand for right and wrong and law and order. And I don't.
Great, thank you. Immigration reform.
Well, you bring up a great point, but one of the other things that we have to change in the way that we operate as conservatives is we got to take back the language. They have taken the immigration reform, and the truth is we need reform. We just got to define what it is. I mean, we need to seal the border. When you look right now that legal immigrants take 12 to 15 years, and sometimes up to $15,000 in legal fees to immigrate to this nation, that's a problem. It needs to be reformed. Look, we've utilized migrant workers in this nation since the Revolutionary War. We brought the French over to help us win, and many of them stayed here, okay? We had a work visa program that worked, and I've been to South Georgia farmers. I've been to their farms. I've met with them to see many of these migrant workers that would come to this nation, which through government policy is what we've driven ourselves to where we're so reliant on migrant workers. But most of them prior to the last couple of decades would come here. They would work. Most of it is piecemeal. They're making a decent wage. It's hard work. As soon as it's done, they go back because what they make here, they live as upper middle class when they go back to their country. And so what we've done is we've tried to fix something that was working relatively well. And we've created a situation. Now what we want is through government policy, poor policy, we've created a situation where many of those migrant workers are afraid if they go back home, they're not going to come back, so they stay here. And now we want to give them amnesty. When I sat with a gentleman from Ecuador recently who is an engineer here. He's a legal immigrant. It took him 12 years to legally come to this country. He sat across from me and he said, I've supported you, but if you let the folks that came here illegally stay after what I had to go through, I'll never support you again. And so you're exactly right, but we have to be very careful in the way we message this because we are going to be seeking immigration reform, but it's not the reform that they're talking about. It's the rule of law. It's getting back. It's simplifying it. It's taking the red tape out of it. It's making it work the way it was intended to work in the nation. And so, but you're right, giving amnesty is a slap in the face to those who have done it properly. We need to make the legal immigration system work. We have to seal the borders. And it always amazes me when I was in the state legislature. We're so reactive. We always want to start a new law instead of enforcing the laws we have on the books. So let's secure the border. Let's enforce the laws we have on the book. Let's streamline the legal immigration system and have a work visa program that allows those that do need to come into the nation to work. We know where they are, we can track them, and we know when they're supposed to go back and we know where they are. If we do that, then we can take a step back and look at what else needs to be done.
Great. Yes, right here.
Thank you. Brad Harris with the Religious Society of Friends. With the Budget Control Act, with the budget caps on the defense spending, this has sort of split a wedge among some conservatives. The defense hawks want to spend more money on defense. Some of the budget hawks fear that defense spending has become more government spending. I wonder if each or any of you could talk a little bit on where you stand on the defense spending caps. Thank you.
Sure, I'll take it. So I think this goes to, I'd always talk about the fact that I believe in a limited government, but an energetic government. And, this sort of ties into a little bit about what, Barry was talking about. The federal government has one legitimate role. It's to provide for the common defense. And so, we talk about border security before. We spend $3.5 trillion a year on a whole bunch of things that the federal government doesn't have constitutional authority or edicts to do, and yet we don't do the one thing well that the Constitution says that we're supposed to do. So, when we talk about being a hawk, I'm a national security hawk. I'm a former United States attorney. I'm a former terrorism prosecutor. I know that when you talk about border security, for instance, everyone wants to talk about immigration, but given my background, I'll tell you, It's about national security. It's about our first line of defense for stopping drug traffickers. It's our first line of defense for human trafficking. And it's about immigration. So, from my perspective, we always have to keep in mind that that is the one legitimate role of the federal government. Now, having said that, within that role, within defense spending, there is absolutely no denying that that there is waste, fraud, and abuse within the defense sector and other sectors. And so that's one of the things that is, as I look at making those decisions, is making sure that it's money that's really going to be allocated for the legitimate purpose of our federal government, but not more than that.
Go ahead.
The problem we have today is our military, the strategy should dictate the budget, but we're letting the budget dictate strategy, and that's a problem. And as you said, this is one of the legitimate or constitutional roles of our federal government. The problem with sequestration is the way that it is done. The best illustration is if in my personal income, if I took a hit as my business did back in 2008 to 2012, I had to reduce my income, which meant I had to go look at my personal budget. If I would have used the sequestration model, I would have gone and I would have cut maybe 10% out of my entertainment budget, 10% out of my food budget, 10% out of my travel budget, 10% out of my home payment, and 10% out of my car payment. That's great, except for I would be homeless and wouldn't have a car. Okay, there's no flexibility in sequestration, and that's one of the problems with it. There is some reforms, as we've recognized here. We need procurement reform. There's a lot of waste in the procurement process. Most of the defense contractors are begging, let's streamline it. It's a shame that when we have a new technology, a new fighter aircraft comes off the assembly line, it's approved for production. It's 13 years before the first one is flying, and the Chinese have already developed and put one out in a year and a half. I mean, these are the types of things that we have to fix. But we have to let those who are on the front line of the battle, the generals who have the strategic view, dictate what the budget of the military is, not the budget dictate our strategy.
Great. I think we have time for one more, and then I think we have to let folks go vote. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. I am just so proud to be here. I'm proud to be a Heritage Sentinel. Thank you for so much of the work that you guys have done here. It's really made an impact in Virginia. I'm a native Virginian. And yes, that's my guy.
Good job.
So my question is, though, with the mandate November 4th from the American people and the reaction to Crumnibus in regards to John Boehner, we've had a lot of great ideas and a lot of great action that all of your speakers have talked about today. How are we going to get the other side of Congress to get it? How are we going to unite them to get what we get and what we want? And, of course, we'd like to see their scores higher.
You're referring to the Senate, I assume? Or are you referring to the Democrats?
Well, what has happened?
Or are you referring to part of our, where?
Well, with the Crumnibus, Crumnibus being just passed,
yeah,
and the outrage from the American people with John Boehner, they feel that they were kind of let down with the November election, and they want to see what we're talking about here today. We want to see a real change, and we want to see our speaker lead that and unite our Congress against President Obama's agenda.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know how our plan of attack is that, because we have great ideas on the table, but how are we going to implement them if we don't have a united Congress with our speaker?
Well, let me offer a thought and then turn it over to our guests. That is one of the reasons we're holding this conference. I think that one of the things that is really important about this conference is when you start talking about these ideas, when you talk about the RAISE Act, like we talked about with Todd Rokita earlier, or when we talk about school choice, like we're going to talk about tomorrow, when we talk about the energy reforms, the tax reforms, all of these ideas, it becomes very hard for even the more establishment types within the Republican Party to oppose us, because the ideas are right. You have the moral high ground, and it becomes very hard for them to say, well, no, I'm not sure I want. I'm not sure I want to put that on the floor this year. I'm not sure it's a good idea to vote for school choice on the floor of the House Representatives this year. All of a sudden, guys like the guys on this panel have the moral high ground. Now, I'm not saying it's a magic bullet. It's going to be hard. We got a lot of work to do this year to convince our leadership to adopt most of our agenda. But I do think that they are open to it. And I think that when you start to talk about the issues and you start to say, this is what we're actually going to focus on this year, I think at the end of the day, they're put in a place where they need to really consider putting that stuff on the floor. I don't know. What do you all think?
Well, I think, I hope you're going to see a different Congress. One of the things to keep in mind, President James Garfield was asked a similar question, how do we change things? And he responded by basically saying, politics is downstream from culture. People, and we would say this on the campaign trail, I want you to go up there and fix Washington. I said, well, I can't do it. I, as one, can't do it. What President Garfield said is if Congress is reckless, ignorant, and corrupt, it's because the people accept recklessness, ignorance, and corruption. I mean, it's the people that send us here. What they're getting at is it isn't just a one-sided battle. There's multiple battlefronts, and part of that front is within your neighborhoods, at your home, bringing more people into this, because what is going to change Washington is a demand from the people to change, but patience with that too, realizing you don't turn a battleship around on a dime. It is going to be a slow and frustrating process. And not assassinate those that you send in to fight the battle if they don't win on the first shot. The other thing is we have to choose our battlefields wisely and, again, start moving the ball down the field a little bit. In 1774, Jefferson was appointed to a committee to look at the top 15 issues facing the colony of Virginia, the most dangerous things facing Virginia. Ironically, the top 15 issues then are the same today. And the committee met in the House of Burgess in Williamsburg, came out with their recommendation, which was the biggest danger to the liberties of the American people is a lethargic people. That we have to awaken the people, and that's what I'm saying. The culture has as much of a battle on this as we do.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there's some good news. Up here, people do listen to the people. You all know that. The Sentinel program out here is very good. And so I ran on principles. I put them on paper ahead of time. That's roughly what ethics is, right? Putting the rules down on paper ahead of time and then trying to follow them. And so I don't think enough solutions up here have been in the $1 trillion ballpark, right? The problems are in the $1 trillion ballpark and the solutions don't match up at that level. But our leadership, I think the switchboards lit up here pretty good on the Cromnibus and in the last month or so. So I think they got the message, and I think our leadership's doing some good stuff on this immigration bill we got going forward right now that came out of conference. It looks like the right elements are in there for a start. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but we can keep working on it. And so, I just applaud the people that keep us paying attention to the issues you want us to focus on. I think we're getting the memo up here. It's coming over.
Great. All right. Well, before we break, just one more note for tomorrow. We have a schedule change. Senator Rand Paul was scheduled to speak in the afternoon. He's going to speak at 11:30 tomorrow. So just make note for yourselves. We have a great agenda tomorrow. We'll have members talking about education reform, defense reform. We'll have Senators Rand Paul, Senator Mike Lee. Lots of folks on the agenda. So we hope to see you tomorrow. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their time. And thank you all for being here. Good to see you.
Great panel.
Yeah, great job.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. You bet.
Really appreciate it. See you all soon.
Okay.
Yeah.